Let me ask you something. When you think about the listening exam, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For a lot of students, the first thing that comes to mind is vocabulary. If I only knew more words, I would do better. And I understand why you might think like that. It feels logical. However, the listening paper is not just a vocabulary test. And if you're approaching this exam as that, then you are missing an important point. So today I'm going to give you 7 strategies that will change the way you prepare and the way that you approach this exam. Let's get into it. Before we start, I would like to take a moment to talk about listening and what listening involves. In real life, when you're speaking to someone and when you are listening to someone, you have the opportunity to look at them, to read the non-verbal cues. You also have the opportunity to ask if you haven't understood everything. So the reason why this paper may feel so difficult to so many of you, and it certainly was very difficult for me when I was a student learning English, is because it is an unnatural situation. So you have not the person who's speaking in front of you, so you cannot read any non-verbal cues. You're relying entirely on your ears, and you have very limited time to actually process what you hear and make the right choices. So I want you to think about all of this so that you realize the many variables and how much cognitive load is involved in this type of exam. As I said earlier, it's not just about learning vocabulary, it is about managing context, reading all the other clues that contribute to creating meaning in a communicative situation. The tips I'm going to give you are based on my own experience as a teacher, but also they are backed by research and will certainly help you achieve the best grades. So to succeed in this listening paper, you are going to need, of course, a solid amount of vocabulary that you have been exposed to throughout the course, throughout the 2-year program. However, knowing vocabulary is not enough. You're going to need strategies that are going to help you make the right choices under the time constraints that you have. These strategies will help you maximize the knowledge that you already have. They will sharpen your exam technique, they will reduce some avoidable errors, and they will help you work strategically under pressure. So for many students, this is going to be the difference between a 5 and a 6 or a 6 and a 7. And here's the other thing that I want you to hold on to throughout this presentation. Listening is 25% of your overall Spanish B grade. So getting the right approach, it really is essential. And remember that those students who score the highest grades in the listening exams, they are not the ones who understand every single word. They are the ones who listen strategically, they manage their attention intelligently, and they stay composed when things get difficult. And all of that is learnable. So let's go. This is just to remind you of the structure of this listening paper. So for both higher level students and the standard level students, the structure is the same. The only difference is the level of difficulty of the text that you're going to listen. So for both standard level and higher level, you will listen to 3 audios. Before each audio text, there will be some reading time. Each text will be repeated twice, and there'll be a 2-minute interval between each repetition. At the end of the second repetition, you will have some time to check your answers and make any changes. The same process is repeated for each of the texts. The total marks are 25, and this is 25% of the overall grade. Let's look at the different skills that you're expected to demonstrate during this listening exam. It's important that you're aware of this so that you can prepare accordingly for the different types of listening that you are required to do. For instance, there will be some questions where you will be expected to identify the main message or the general idea of a conversation or of a speech. However, in other questions, you'll be asked to identify very specific information or details. Additionally, there might be questions where what the question will be asking is not what the speaker says, but perhaps how they feel or the mood they are in. This means that you will need to guess the implicit meaning behind the words that you hear. It's also important that you know how to use context to construct meaning, especially when there are words that you have never encountered before, and this in itself is a skill. Finally, also very important that you demonstrate familiarity with different types of audio, different types of text. So, for instance, a conversation with friends will have a vocabulary and register very different to a podcast or to a speech or to a voice message that has been left on your answering machine. So the more prepared you are for all these different types of audios and all these different types of questions, the better your performance is likely to be. Let's start with the tips. Tip number 1 is about the reading time. Use it wisely. You have reading time at the start of the exam, before the audio begins, and before each of the texts. And most students use it to read the questions, which is fine, but it's not enough. And this is where you can probably lose marks before a single word of Spanish has even been heard. Most students skim the questions passively, like they are waiting for the audio to start, and that is a mistake. Your reading time is not waiting time, it is working time. And here's what you should be doing. So first of all, read the question carefully and identify what it is actually asking. Is it asking for a specific detail, a name, a number, a place? Is it asking for a speaker's attitude or an opinion? Or is it asking you to work out what is implied rather than stated? And this is very important because it will change how you focus your attention. And we're going to come back to this later on. Secondly, you will need to underline or circle, highlight the key words in each question. And these become your listening anchors. So when the audio plays, your brain knows exactly what to search for. Third and finally, this is the step that most students skip. And what is very important is that you need to start predicting, anticipating the type of language that you're going to hear, the topic, what vocabulary might come up. Use the questions to build a mental picture of what the text is probably about, the context, the kind of speaker. And if you do this, this is what researchers call activating your schema. Priming your prior knowledge to work with the audio rather than against it. Research consistently shows that students who do this type of preparation before the audio starts, they get better results because you are doing all the heavy lifting for your brain before the pressure begins. Tip number 2 is about avoiding mental translation, and this is the habit of hearing Spanish and immediately trying to convert it into your first language inside your head. This is one of the most damaging habits that you can bring into a listening exam because the audio doesn't wait. While you are translating sentence 1 into English or German or French or whatever your target language is, sentence 2 and 3 have already passed and you are permanently behind trying to catch up. Research shows that listeners who avoid mental translation and try to understand meaning and process meaning directly in the target language perform much better on comprehension tasks. And this is because translation consumes working memory, and you need that working memory to be able to cope with the demands of the listening tasks. My advice is make notes, especially during the first time you hear the audio, and try to double check those notes in the second time to reach the right decision for your questions. Also try to listen to authentic audio. We'll be talking about this a bit later on. Get your brain used to matching sound to meaning without the translation step. It will give you more confidence in your own abilities as well in Spanish. Tip number 3 is about anticipating synonyms, and especially during your reading time. One of the most important strategies I can give you right now, and it comes directly from my experience as a teacher, is that you will almost never hear the same words that appear on the question or on the answer options. So if a question, for instance, asked about identifying las ventajas de la tecnología, you will very rarely hear ventajas in the audio. Instead, you might hear los beneficios o los aspectos positivos o lo bueno de la tecnología. Or, for instance, if an answer option uses sorprendido, the speaker might say estoy muy emocionado o no me lo esperaba. So your job during reading time is to think, if this answer were correct, how else might it be expressed? And that kind of mental gymnastics, because that's what it is, a type of mental workout, is what separates students who score well from those who understand the audio but still miss the marks. Tip number 4 is about becoming familiarized with the sound of the language. So one of the main obstacles to understanding Spanish in this case is not your vocabulary knowledge, it is the inability to decode the sound stream itself. And I'm going to tell you how fast this happens. So think about it. In real time, in just under 2 seconds per sentence, your brain needs to recognize the individual sound, identify the syllable, then the stress patterns, detect where one word ends and the next one begins, retrieve the meaning of each word from memory, and group everything into a meaningful chunk before it starts to disappear. And this is what you will have to do. And for learners of a language, it doesn't happen automatically. This skill has to be built. One of the things that I think is very important that you can do during your revision is to train your ear on connected speech features in Spanish. For instance, that in colloquial language you might not hear para, you might hear pa, voy pa'l campo. Or when está blends with the next word if it starts with a vowel. Por ejemplo, mi hermana está en el campo. Mi hermana está en el campo, está en el campo. Try to listen to those normal features of natural Spanish. Then practice also with authentic Spanish at natural pace, not in order to understand everything, but to build tolerance for speech and that reduction in what you hear. Every time that you push through a text that is slightly too fast, you are building your decoding capacity. Finally, very important, don't just abandon the text when you miss something. The instinct is to freeze when you don't recognize a word or you don't understand it, but this is the wrong response. Just try to keep going and use context, what came before and what comes after, to reconstruct meaning. That recovery instinct is a trained skill, it's not a talent, and you can do it. Tip number 5 is about listening to authentic language, and this is connected to the previous tip. So always practice listening to authentic language. So remember, the goal is not to understand every single word, but to build the fluency that will allow you to decode in a more automatic way. You will use to the sound of the language, get used to the speed, the way people use language, the way the sounds connect together. So very important. And also it is vital that you listen to the different variety of accents that we have in Spanish from the different Spanish-speaking countries. In your exam, you may have texts spoken with Mexican Spanish or Argentinian Spanish or Peninsular Spanish. Make sure that you are aware, you are familiar with the different accents and their peculiarities as well. Remember, the important thing is not to understand every single word, but to start building that resilience and start training your brain so that it gets comfortable with the sound of Spanish. And this will make a measurable difference to your decoding fluency and your confidence on exam day. Tip number 6 is about deducing information. And this is the tip that separates strong scores from exceptional ones. And it is the one students most consistently under-prepare for. So not every answer in the IB listening exam is stated directly in the audio. Some questions will require you to infer, to combine what you hear with logic, with context, with tone and implied meaning to reach an answer the speaker never explicitly gave you. This is very important. A literal question might ask, where does the speaker work? And in the audio, the speaker might say, trabajo en un hospital. And the answer is, en un hospital. This is clear and direct. An inferential question might ask, what is the speaker's attitude towards the new policy? And in the audio, the speaker says something like, bueno, supongo que hay que aceptarlo, aunque no es lo que esperábamos. No word there means disappointed or reluctant. Those words are never used. However, the implication is quite clear to a listener who is tracking tone, word choice, and the actual meaning of the words pronounced. This is where research also adds an important precision. This type of inference of understanding implicit meaning in listening is just not a single skill. What this means for you is that when you practice with past papers, don't just mark the answers right or wrong, categorize each question. So do I need to find some specific literal answer that is directly stated in the audio, or is it inferential? And if so, what kind? Is it going to be attitude? Is it going to be tone, implied meaning? Try to identify where you consistently lose marks. I can guarantee a pattern will emerge, and that pattern will tell you exactly where to direct your practice. Higher level students, this is for you specifically, the proportion of inferential and pragmatic questions is much higher at higher level, and the texts are longer and more complex. So this tip is especially critical for you. So do not leave inference practice to chance. Do not hunt for a direct phrase to match. Track the meaning always. Tip number 7 is about creating a list of spoken vocabulary. How many of you are revising for this exam using written vocabulary lists? But knowing a word on a page and knowing a word as a sound are two completely different things. And this distinction is more significant than you probably realize. You might be able to read sin embargo and immediately knows that it means however, but if I say it very quickly, blending it together at a natural pace, sin embargo, do you catch it instantly? Many students will not be able to do that. And this is what researchers call the gap between orthographic vocabulary knowledge, the word as a text, and oral vocabulary knowledge, which is the word as sound. When you learn or review vocabulary, do not just write it and read it. Say it out loud. Listen to it spoken by a native speaker with different accents at different speeds. Hear it in a sentence, in context, and not just in isolation. There are some tools, some strategies that you can use for building oral vocabulary. So first of all, especially if you are setting up flashcards, try to add audio to every card so you hear the word as well as see it written. Secondly, use vocabulary in context through graded listening. And third, use shadowing. Choose 30 or 60-second audio clips with authentic language and speak along with the speaker, mimicking their pace, their rhythm, and connected speech. This is one of the most research-supported techniques for building both oral vocabulary and decoding fluency simultaneously, and is completely free. The goal is automaticity, when your brain recognizes vocabulary in speech without conscious effort. When this happens, you free up the capacity for your brain to do higher order work, which is required in the exam: identifying inference, tracking discourse, evaluating tone. And this is also the foundation of a grade 7 performance. Many students are caught out by words that they know perfectly well in writing, but they fail to recognize them at speed. Oral vocabulary is not the same as written vocabulary, so build it in the same way, deliberately, repeatedly, in context. It will really help you on the day of exam. Finally, here's a checklist for you based on the strategies I've just given you. First of all, identify the focus of the questions. Make sure that you know whether you need to listen for a general message or a general idea, or there is some specific detail, or perhaps some implied meaning. Secondly, anticipate the language that you might be listening to. Number 3, listen for chunks and context. Use that context to help you create meaning, to help you understand. Number 4, make notes, especially during the first listening. Note down any words, any expressions that you hear that might point you into the right direction. If you cannot identify any specific words, you can even transcribe phonetically what you hear. You might be able to recognize some of those sounds during the second time that you hear the audio. Number 5 is make sure you answer all the questions. Do not leave any question unanswered. Now, the next 2 tips in your checklist is about your preparation. So make sure that you are ready to hear different types of accents, variety of languages, registers, and a variety of speeds. Just be prepared for that. So you might not be able to understand every single word, and that's absolutely fine. There are other ways that are going to be there to help you reach the correct answers. And then finally, stay composed. Do not panic if you find yourself not understanding something or forgetting to do something. Stay calm, there is time, and you can recover. If you found this video useful and you would like to continue preparing for your listening exam, there are 2 documents that I have created to support you with your preparation, and you can find the links in the description.